All right. Hello. God, I fucking hate the camera. We're going to take a break from the weird white nationalist shit and the kind of break from the conversation about what is the national identity, if there is one at all, and what should a state stand for. We're going to talk about this conversation between Hasan Piker and Trainwrecks. I don't know much about this, except that it is a conversation about Hasan's kind of living or lifestyle, and if that is compatible with the political philosophy of socialism. It's not entirely clear yet. Well, I guess we'll find out as we watch it. But this is, as you can see, uploaded from Hasan on Hasan's channel. So this is, he obviously thinks he came off incredibly well in this. I don't know, probably he must have. Well, maybe not must have, but at least he thinks that he did. This is 2 hours and 30 minutes. I doubt, I highly doubt that we will watch the whole thing. Because I have other things to do, first of all. And second of all, I doubt that either of them have the conceptual framework to articulate their ideas precisely, and that they might just keep repeating themselves. But we'll see. I'll just stop the video and we'll go from there.
You're a radical. You're a radical psychotic leftist. You are literally Mao and Stalin and Karl Marx together. That's how these dumb motherfuckers in America operate.
Which brings me to the point where Train is talking to Will Neff about the Turkey charity, and then things slide completely out of control, and then Hasan and then calls out Train for critical gambling. You want me to link to the thread or not? Because remember, this happened like this week.
He knows he knows what it is. I know what it is. Yes.
Okay.
I think I remember you making fun of Train for reacting, but a few months later you started reacting as well. You just made jokes, you didn't propagate the narrative. I don't know what that's about. I guess I should give some background to who these people are. I imagine
Train,
if you end up watching this, you probably know who they all are.
Point. What did you say to Will, and what did you say?
So I went into the call initially to
if you can find a clip, that would be very helpful.
Reach out or
chatter.
to put out
That'd
an
be very
olive branch,
helpful.
right? I was talking about how I love the podcast.
I'll just pause there. So Hasan Piker is a incredibly popular streamer. He is a self-described agit propagandist for socialism, which I think he takes at its most basic to be the means of production being in the hands of the workers as opposed to private ownership. I don't know how he cashes that out. Maybe he'll talk about that a bit. I don't watch Hasan because for me at least he doesn't offer anything interesting or novel to say, but that's fine because I'm not the target audience. XQC I know very little of because again I'm definitely not his target audience, and Trainwrecks I haven't seen in a very long time. Back when I was aware of this kind of scene, Trainwrecks was used to host debates between different kinds of people. This we're talking about 2015, 2016, probably 2017. I think he does gambling streams or something. He's obviously doing quite well for himself, judging by the apartment and the view and it provides him. I think he is a shareholder in Kick, or the owner, or is involved in some capacity. But presumably he disagrees about socialism and what it is, and stuff to do with Piker.
Among other things, right? And then the conversation came up. He brought that up as an example, and I clarified the example because at the end of the day, olive branch or not, I think there's an avenue regarding, the socialism in which, Hasan preaches but doesn't act with, right? There's that avenue where I don't think we'll ever come to terms with together, right? So that that is the disconnect. I don't know if him and I will find that middle ground for, but that didn't come up because I went on there to talk about it. That just kind of came up passively. If you watch the clip, the entire clip, that was generally a positive call, right? I think he kind of saw the clip and he picked those like 10 seconds out.
Unless Hasan doesn't feel that way.
As far as like socialism being at odds with my mode of existence, that is another thing that I am very that is another thing that I've been very consistent on with respect to like having anti-capitalist values while simultaneously still being a fucking dumbass who likes commodities that are luxurious. That has been a consistent talking point for myself for a very long time. So I don't know why you think that ultimately conflicts. Socialism is not a poverty cult. Socialism or anti-capitalism or wanting to make things at least marginally better for working class Americans is not, no matter how much people say, oh, lol, Bernie Sanders has 3 houses fucking owned or whatever the fuck. That is not at odds with the way I live. This is a point of contention, though. I will agree. There's broad debate on the subject matter. There's many different kinds of ways of approaching it, but ultimately it's about the relationship to the means of production. That's it. That's all this is. And it's about giving workers more autonomy. It's not about doing charity, okay? I've never said socialism is charity, even though I myself engage in charitable acts. I've been fairly consistent on that as well with respect to just doing it regardless of whatever people say, even if they shit on me. I think XQC can advocate for that as well. I've literally had private conversations with them many, many years ago even about like, it's a good thing. People will shit on you regardless. You should still do it. But yeah, socialism is exclusively and almost entirely about the relations of the means of production and how society is developed around the current organization of the economy and how commodities are produced.
Okay, so
Okay, so what's interesting there is Piker is able to very elegantly kind of frame the conversation in his favor and present himself in a really good light. He first acknowledges that there is a debate and talks about it as if he respects it or sees a merit in it, even though he very quickly ultimately dismisses the argument as not being relevant. And the reason he doesn't think it's relevant, or the way he's able to do that, is because he sets up socialism in a very kind of thin terms, which is the Marxist conception of socialism being the relationship between the proletariat and the bourgeois. The proletariat being the workers who produce the goods and the proletariat who own the means of production, i.e. the materials and machinery that allows people to build or create goods for individuals. Socialism, however, it's only something I'm just now starting to kind of dip my toes into. But socialism is a lot more varied than that. And even for this reductionism down to just a class struggle is... you might think it's overly simplistic. You might say it's naive. Or you might say that is a inadequate understanding of socialism. Because arguably the point of socialism, at least by today's standards, is that it's a kind of ethical framework. It's not just about this sort of relationship between workers and owners of capital, but that's supposed to be important with regards to some sort of equality or equity between individuals. And the way he's kind of set it up is arguably not that. There's also an interesting question about, and I'm not saying I disagree with him here, but there's an interesting question to be asked about the relationship between theoretical reasons and practical reasons. Oh my god, that cat is popping off. Oh my god! What do you do? Oh, god damn it. Come here. Come here. Bloody hell. All right. I've lost my train of thought. Let's just keep going. Oof.
So you're saying that if there's a distinct point in what he sees socialism and the action you can do to further socialism and okay, it makes sense. Do you agree with what he said? Did you know what he said?
No.
He says that socialism, right, is more the means of production and the worker stuff, and not the whole spread the wealth thing. And I think you say, oh, he should spread the wealth more type shit, right?
I would agree. So
yeah,
I would agree with
spreading the wealth is not socialism. If that was the case, then Jeff Bezos would be the #1 socialist. You know what I mean? He albeit a very minor part of his overall wealth, he gives back fucking hundreds of millions of dollars. That he would be literally a socialist if that was the case.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to an extent. But we should, I think, be very careful about this idea of spreading wealth, this redistribution of wealth. Because presumably the reason people are socialists is because they believe that this is the best way and the most just way of redistributing wealth to people who need it. Why would we think that? Why would we think that? Well, imagine a world in which the workers did own the means of production, and certain firms in this world became financially better off, in the sense that the firms produced goods that people wanted more than other competing firms. In that sort of world in which these workers own the means of production, this sort of market socialism, you can still have extreme amounts of wealth inequality between workers. So what do I mean by that? Well, suppose we've got Team A, Team B, Team C, and Team D. Let's suppose that Team A make avocados, Team B make berries, C make capsicums, and D make dildos. Alright, cool. Fantastic. Avocados. We'll say bavocados instead of berries. So avocados and bavocados are effectively the same, except one's a different type of avocado. So two of these firms, A and B, are competing against each other in terms of the avocado industry. Then you've got directly competing. Then you've got the dildo company, and you've got the capsicum company. Presumably, people want certain things more than they want other things. You might find that lots of people want dildos, but nobody wants capsicums. So the company, the workers that own the dildo factory, they end up becoming enriched, and the wealth with regards to that business becomes distributed across the workers within there. Capsicum people become much poorer with regards to the amount that they're able to make, and therefore the workers don't earn as much. And then suppose that A, the avocado company, beat the bavocado company, that they sold more. Then the workers in avocado in A would be significantly financially better off than those in B. And we can suppose it becomes such a point that the bavocado company, Team B, is just on its last legs. And that the people who work for that particular company, the workers of that particular firm, are unable to afford capsicums or dildos. But the people in Team A are very much able to afford both in quite great quantities. It seems that the distribution of wealth in this kind of fictitious example is extremely unequal. But it would seem, I think, for a person who wants to endorse socialism, it would seem very odd to say that that's a just world. Because it seems to have produced, it seems possible it could end up producing the same sort of inequality that they criticize capitalism for having. But they would not want to say it's just simply because it's come about that way. Presumably there's some sort of end state they have in mind. right, which is some form of equality in terms of redistribution of wealth, that they think is fundamentally unjust within capitalism, and that if any other economic system generated the exact same end state, even if it was a type of socialism, that would also be unjust. I don't think it's true. Like, I think it would be very strange if we set up the kind of world in which Hasan wanted and it ended up being the same way unequal, except instead of private ownership, workers were the owners, and that those same people, and that you still ended up with the same sort of inequality of wealth distribution, and to say that's good. Presumably the reason that we want, or presumably the reason the socialist wants, the workers to own the means of production, is to stamp out kind of inequality and unfairness that they see inherent in capitalism. Presumably, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's totally fine with inequality. He just thinks inequality is not justified because of Marxian theory of exploitation.
So I think the point is this.
But that would seem weird. That would seem weird if you thought that.
Right. Preaching socialism without action is literally just capitalism. Do you understand? If you preach the idealistic way that society should operate, yet you don't implement any of those systems, right, within your own, let's say proportionally within your own community, to show that these systems can work. Just wait.
No. I love that. No, that's actually a great point. It's a great point, and it unfortunately fails to capture how inescapable capitalism is. Do I benefit from it? Absolutely. I'm a profoundly fortunate person, something that I regularly acknowledge and talk about all the time. I'm very privileged. I'm very fortunate. These are things that I do not hide. I'm wealthy. Another thing that I do not hide. I don't know why people always say that I hide it, but
do you understand that
if cooperatives can work individually, and I can point to socialization working in other countries, for example, like in European social democracies like Norway, even in Canada, it works better than the United States, even though it has its flaws. So there are instances of like socialization, not socialism, working in other countries, and yet that has still not changed people's minds in the United States of America. So I don't know why you think that like something completely and entirely removed from socialism itself, which would be me, like, I guess, doing socialism in my own community. I don't know how you would do that, but I would love to hear your perspective. I don't know how that would genuinely change people's minds in that regard. But as far as like my own form of commodity production, I work with union labor in union shops in the United States of America, and it's domestically manufactured when I do merchandising. And I have some form of cooperative organization where the people that I work with, not my workers per se, but people that I work with, whether it be my producers or editors, have full autonomy over their times, full autonomy over how much they make, full autonomy over a percentage of the profits or even more. Not only that, but they also have editorial independence, like in the case of Ostenox, who can say what he wants, and I'm not going to, go after him unless he's making an erroneous mistake. So that's
Which
it.
He has
that's my perspective, and I think I try to live by my values as best as possible, and I think I do a decent job, I think, at that.
That perspective is convenient, in my opinion.
Okay. Right. So Hasan is very good. I'll give him this. He's very good at what the cool kids call optics. He's very good at turning things in his favor or to dress them up as if they are when they're clearly not. I will say this, all right? The idea that, so you have a theory about how things ought to be, and pointing out that someone is inconsistent with that is a logical fallacy. It's effectively an ad hominem, right? So it doesn't tell us anything about whether the theory is correct or not. It just tells us that someone is inconsistent, and that informs us nothing about the theory. So in terms of kind of theory, like theoretical reasoning and logic, that is just the case, and I'm sorry for anyone who wants to think otherwise. It's like, it just doesn't tell you anything about the truth of it. So in other words, if someone thought the world was around, and yet they acted behaved in ways that they thought the world was flat, that wouldn't tell us anything about whether the world actually is round or actually is flat. It just tells us that there's an inconsistency in a person, which people have many inconsistencies. That doesn't mean that the things that they say aren't true, and it doesn't prove that they're false, or vice versa. So, for example, just because Hasan lives arguably incongruently with his kind of values, that doesn't mean that the values he does live are the correct values either. It doesn't tell us anything. But there is something compelling about the idea that for values or to have real kind of... oh my god, this cat, I'm gonna shut the fuck up. He's not... Okay. He's just going to keep going. I'm just going to have to battle through it. There is something compelling about the idea that if someone doesn't live by their values, then that does say something about the values themselves. It's not entirely clear why we should think that. Like, what would justify that? One, because I mean, maybe there is. Maybe I'm remember about the theory stuff. So think about it this way, right? You have a Christian, you have a Muslim, you have a Jew. For example, you have a Buddhist. Right? They propose that there is a way that the world is and a way that someone should live, right? And then they might try and enforce those values on other people. That person doesn't even adhere to the laws or the values to which they proclaim to be true. There is in some sense in which we think that either that person does not believe what they say, that this is not a legitimate way of living because the person who proclaims it the most is unable to do it. And that tells us something about the practicality of these values. 3, it kind of tells us that it's not a way that can be lived. Therefore, the theory is kind of inert or impotent with regards to providing us reasons or providing us motivation to do things. I can't remember precisely where in the Bible it says it, but there's this idea, this quote or paraphrase, is that faith without works is dead. That seems to capture something like values don't mean anything unless you live them. And the best way of allowing a value system to thrive, or at least be a live option for people, that they pick it up and go with it, is to live it, to show that the lifestyle, that these values, in accordance with these values, is a live option, that is a consistent option, that is an attractive option, and a possible way of living. And when someone doesn't do that, we look at that, we look at the kind of lifestyle and the style of living, and see that not even the person who proclaims it can make it work. Therefore, it's not a live option. Therefore, there's something inherently wrong with it. Either it's not workable or it's just kind of wrong. There is something to say, I think, about in terms of like standing for something to do with meaning in life, something to do with the purpose of one's life, constructing one's values, constructing one's character. There's a kind of constructivist project here, but it's not entirely clear why we should think that objection works. But what I will say is that if you think Christianity is bogus because the Christians don't live it, right, and you think Islam is bogus because people don't live it, and on it goes, you might want to apply the same sorts of reasoning to something like socialism, which is that if someone is progressing this thing and they have all these values and beliefs about how the world should be structured and how people should live, and they can't do that, then it says something's fundamentally wrong with this view, which is either there is something wrong with it or that it needs some sort of reformation. And what Piker does is he very quickly points out that, yep, this is possibly an ad hominem. because in some sense, which he kind of points to, is that the way that he wants to live, like live it requires, is outside of his ability to do anything about it, right? So he can't make people yet. If he gets political power, which is the coercive apparatus of the state, then he can begin to coerce people to live the way that he wants. But his idea, I think, is that capitalism is so kind of embedded in society that there actually is no live way of living the way that he wants to. That seems obviously false. Again, if you turn to a Muslim society, like a Muslim community, Christian community, I pick the religious ones because they're the most kind of obvious analogous, I think. If you take these, if you look at these small clusters of groups, people definitely do. People do choose to live in this way. They do make their kind of lifestyle workable within the larger framework of everyone's freedom. And socialists likely do this too. There are, I think, I'd have to look it up, but there are communes, right? There are communes in which people who move into them choose to live a certain kind of way, a certain kind of arrangement of lifestyle. And they choose to do it. They have to make sacrifices. But it's just that what that goes to show is that the things that they sacrifice, they think are not as valuable as this kind of way of living, this kind of communal or social way of living. So all Piker is really kind of showing us is that in some sense, he just doesn't value these kind of social ways of living more than his current lifestyle. That he thinks, right, so maybe this is the idea, right? So maybe this is the idea, is that the way someone lives reveals to us their values, right? So every time you make a choice, let's say between ice cream, chocolate, and vanilla, for example, whenever you make a choice of one over the other, you are effectively saying that there's something about one that you value over the other. And that even it's more difficult to do it, as he suggests that it is to create his kind of world, there are choices that can be made, even if they might be difficult, where sacrifices have to be made to live in accordance with those. And as he points out, he enjoys luxury. That's fine. But by him consistently choosing luxury over these kinds of socialist values of workers owning the means of production, which he thinks is which he is kind of describing as the only kind of value that matters, he's able to kind of wiggle out. But the fact that he keeps choosing luxury over other types of values which could be considered either part of or connected to socialism, that's revealing to us, right, whether he realizes it or not, it reveals to us that he values these things more than the values he proclaims to value. That tells us something about his character, which is a kind of inconsistency. Maybe that's the type of argument. Now, you might say, he makes this point where he tries to, and this is what he does, is that when he does merchandise, for example, he works alongside or with union workers, right? He gives his Ostenox, he gives Ostenox, presumably his editor, a lot of leeway and space and freedom to do his work. You might say he gives him a long leash, right? But note, saying you're working with, right, and that you're allowing for someone to have freedom, right, or a longer leash to say what they want to do, that is not workers owning the means of production, right? These are still employees who either own the kind of own private company into which you enter into a contract, right? But they don't get any say over, like, how there's a kind of asymmetry, right? If it was really kind of workers owning the means of production, then they would get more say, right, over whether Hasan can, or Piker can say kind of things, watch certain kind of things, right? They should be able to have inputs into that. And given that they don't, and given that Piker makes very clear that if Osternox steps out of a certain kind of line, whatever that might be, he has the authority or the power to effectively break up their working relationship. That he can jettison him and find someone else. And that seems to suggest quite clearly that Osternox doesn't get a vote, right, in the same way that Piker does with regards to the direction in which they move their project. Because the project for them isn't a joint one that's socialized, right? It's not like Osternox, I don't think, gets a portion of the revenue that's generated by Hasan. He probably gets paid like a certain amount, or perhaps even a certain percentage. But presumably he doesn't get a vote on what they do, or what Hasan does, right? Presumably only Hasan gets to decide what he does with his business. I'm crabbling on, but that's fine because nobody's watching, and nobody will, and that's fine too because this isn't for you, it's for me. Presumably, in order to live like a socialist lifestyle, what you would expect from a socialist is that if they did pursue some sort of private venture, some sort of business venture, that the moment they begin to hire employees, those employees now own the initiator of the venture eventually gives away shares for free to whoever they've hired, such that the people that they've hired now get just as much as a say in how the company's run as the person who started it. So if Piker is hiring editors, does have moderators, has people who are working for him, right, in some sort of capacity, whether voluntarily or otherwise, he should be giving away portions of his private venture to them so that it's socialized, so that they get equal distribution of revenue or get to vote on how revenue is distributed within the party, within the team, what direction they should be taking, what they should be watching, what they should be saying, what he should be saying, because he is only one cog in the machine of this thing. So he would effectively have to give away that sort of the power to make these sorts of choices. That's what he would have to do. That's what we would expect to some extent. And then if he got out of line, then that group of workers could kick him out if they sort of decided to. Yeah, that's what we would expect. We would expect him to give contracts out where someone can work however they want, so long as they get the project done on his timeline, and as long as they stay within the boundaries of what he desires them to do, right? And that the merchandise people, they decide what kind of merchandise is making, and then they vote about it, and then they vote or decide about how to distribute any profits. Doesn't do that, right? Doesn't do that in the way that you would expect, arguably, a socialized company to.
Like, it's a convenient perspective to have, right? Like, if I would accept that perspective.
Wait, why is it convenient?
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. So everything that you do would be completely fine, right? If you moved away from these extremisms, right? And you moved more so to the middle, and you're like, okay, listen, guys, I'm a capitalist, but I believe in socialist systems to be mixed in with the capitalistic systems to create a better society, right? To grab the good of both. You understand? But the problem is you're completely shitting on capitalism. You're completely eat the rich, anti-capitalist. So if you moved your like ideations or whatever the fuck you call it, more so to I'm a capitalist, but I believe in socialist values. I believe in socialist systems. I believe in more of a mix, right? If you pushed it more to the middle left, it would make sense to exactly what you do. It makes sense to your entire business model. But to sit there and
wait, what? Address why it's conflicting.
Oh, I'm getting there. But to sit there, right, and to sell, right? Think about this, okay? Your entire business model, in my opinion, is that of a capitalist business model, right? You sell how the world should be while justifying not implementing those very systems of how the world should be by saying you're just participating in society. That's fine. You can participate in society, but at the very least, in the position that you're in, making what you make, in my opinion, the words are not enough. You should be implementing these very systems within your own community to show that these systems work. Do you understand? On a proportional level, if you cannot implement the very systems you preach that should be implemented within America into your community of 30,000, then I would just say you're grandstanding and you're just selling an idea to make money yourself, right? Like,
that's great.
To me, that's
no,
capitalism.
That's a great point. That's a great point. You're absolutely correct on it if your understanding of what I advocate for was sound. And
okay. So effectively, Trainwrecks talks about socialist systems. I'm not entirely sure what he means by systems. But he suggests that Piker should move into a kind of mixed economy, which is that the economy is capitalist, and that there are socialist values mixed in. It's not entirely clear to me what he means by socialist values. Why isn't it clear? Because things like equality, although a socialist may agree that equality is valuable, these are in no way either incompatible with market freedoms. In other words, I think there's no reason to think that the socialist has a monopoly on a value like equality, or min-maxing like welfare. So presumably what he means by this is that there should be some sort of welfare system. Maybe that's what he means, such that the worst off better off in this system than they would be in any other sort of arrangement, some sort of Rawlsian thing. But the only way to kind of generate the kind of capital required to fund something like that is through capitalism. Why would we think that? Well, he doesn't say that. He just says that you live like a capitalist, but you have these sorts of values. Why not pair them up? And then you get a market system of capitalism in which people have freedoms in the economy, but also that there is a robust welfare state. Why don't you do that? Yeah. Seems to some extent, I'm not sure. I wouldn't say Trainwreck doesn't know what socialism is per se. It doesn't seem, by describing, socialist systems. I don't know what that means. Yeah.
And I think this is a normal misunderstanding, and a lot of people have this misunderstanding. I just gave you examples of a relation that I have where I am producing commodities with the help of others that are involved in the process. And I told you that I utilize, when I am actually producing commodities, utilize the same values that I uphold, okay? Whether it be unionized domestic employees that I am, whenever I'm working on merchandise, or whether it be having a cooperative podcast or having full autonomy and having everyone set their own wages with relation to how much profit or how little profit a certain venture makes. That is as close as you can get to like multiple different formations of trade unionism, an anarcho-syndicalist perspective, and also some level of socialism. So from that perspective, you are objectively incorrect. In most other circumstances, I have no control over it. There's nothing I can do. Like as far as as far as like turning Amazon into a cooperative corporation, I can't do that. It is a massive, almost $1 trillion operation that I have no control over.
Okay, so
right, but Trainwrecks, right, to be clear, Trainwrecks wasn't saying that. Trainwrecks wasn't saying you have to turn the world into this. He's saying that with regards to the things that you can affect personally, they should be arranged such that they are more befitting to living out these values that you proclaim, which is that the workers are the means of production. In the case of the merchandise, in the case of the streaming, in the case of the moderators, in the case of the editors, presumably these people do not have a vote upon how or the direction in which Hasan moves his venture, because they are not owners in his venture. They own their own private firm, right, which they run themselves. And that he comes along with his own and joins in a contract, right, about an arrangement that they both agree upon about how to do things. That is not the same. It's just a contract between private firms. There is no socialism here. It's only when the moderators and the editors and arguably the union and arguably the thing would get ownership of the entirety of the thing that we would have something like that. We would want something like that. We would expect something like that. And as he pointed out, there are companies that already do this. I don't know what they are, but I'll presume for the sake of argument that these companies exist. These kind of co-ops. But he is not running his system like that. He doesn't run his world like that. And he generates considerable revenue, and it belongs to him. Arguably, the point of having socialism, again, is a redistribution of wealth, right? To distribute wealth as you see fit, right? Well, not as you see fit, but as in accordance to some sort of pattern, right? In some kind of theory of justice. The fact that he does not do this, the fact that he holds on to a considerable amount of his wealth and spends it on things, means that he is choosing not to redistribute it in accordance to some sort of pattern about how people should live or what's really valuable, right? One way of thinking about it, not to borrow from economics or the effective altruist movement, is opportunity costs. So you walk around living your life. You can choose to do one thing, you can choose to do a second thing, right? If we're attempting to redistribute wealth, if we're attempting to bring about some sort of pattern, or that there's some sort of value that is better or the best comparative to others, the person ought to choose actions that either bring about that value or are part of what it is to have that value. If you buy a cup of coffee, suppose you go out and you get, I'm in Australia, so a $5 coffee. I don't know how much it is anywhere else in the world. We'll say $5, right? When you spend that $5, right, on that coffee, that $5 could have gone to something else, right? It could have gone to a bag of M&Ms, right? It could have gone to a loaf of bread, we'll say, or a couple loaves of bread. Or you could choose not to spend it all, save up the money to spend on something else, say like a PlayStation. Don't know why I said that. I don't know if anyone even uses them anymore, right? You could choose to do that. You could also choose to redistribute the wealth to an individual who has not worked for it, who lives in worse circumstances than yourself, right? So you could instead give that $5 to a homeless person, like a street beggar, or you could donate it to a charity. Or you might see a worker who is in the same company as you, who doesn't earn as much as you, and you might decide, well, actually, maybe this worker does, and you give them the $5, right? You could do that. You choose not to do that, right? You choose not to redistribute the wealth or buy the M&Ms or the bread or the PlayStation. You choose to spend it on the coffee because you value this coffee more than you value the other things that I've mentioned, right? So anytime he's spending, right, $1,000 on a shirt, say, $1,000 on a pair of jeans, or buys a house in LA, right? This amount, you have to think about the opportunity cost about, well, what could he have spent this money on, right? He could have spent it on other items, or he could have redistributed it to the people who work for him, right? Or he could have redistributed it to some sort of charity, right? Or NGO, which he thinks is underserved because of the massive wealth gap exists, right? So if he thinks something like, and people not having homes is a bad thing, right? Although the government might not be redistributing the wealth, right, through coercion and taxation, he can choose to, instead of spending this large amount of money on a shirt or whatever, he can choose to redistribute that of his own accord. And the question is, why doesn't he do it? He does mention, though, that he does give to charity. But the point is, I think, as well, is that, well, is that enough redistribution? How much redistribution is required here? And you might think quite a lot, because there's quite a lot of inequality. Now, it doesn't matter. Arguably, it doesn't matter whether other people do it, right? What matters is if you do it, right? And whether it completely solves the problem also doesn't matter, because alleviating some of the inequality is better than alleviating none of it, right? And the more you can alleviate of it, the better. Ultimately, he's kind of saying, in some sense, by spending the large amounts of money and refusing to redistribute more wealth, he's effectively saying that there is a limit into which someone has to redistribute. He doesn't have to do as much. And that if that costs the lives of people who are worse off than him, then so be it. And again, if you're a socialist, and because you think that redistribution of wealth such that it helps people and makes them more equal is important, you might find that quite unacceptable. What I will say, though, is it's not surprising that Piker does that, because it is his money and he is entitled to keep it. What this might show the socialist is that even the most committed of us cannot behave well, and so we must use coercion and violence in order to get people to do it. That ends up being kind of authoritarian, right? Yeah, right.
You're saying is that for you, the socialism aspects are only the means of production and the workers and the fact that the unionize or not. It's all about the workers. Okay, I have a question then. When you have a podcast, the Freedom Pod, how much are the guests and producers paid on that show?
1/3 of the entire revenue.
The guests are paid?
No, the guests are not paid. The guests can come on voluntarily, of course. If they would like to get paid, we would, of course, pay them if there was like a guest fee or anything. But we don't pay guests. We are not interested. We're not interested in having a guest on specifically to make money. I don't think that would be weird. I think
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Does it make sense? If there's a guest on a show, they're presumably doing some sort of work, right? This isn't just play around fun time, right? I mean, I guess it depends upon... I know Marxists have this argument about what counts as actual labor. You might think something like a podcast. There's only one kind of labor in it. It's the person building it with the means of production. If you think of podcasts as like a type of like service of entertainment as opposed to some sort of consumed good, such that once it is consumed, it's gone, or that it is used consistently. You might think that none of these people do any work except the people who edit it. But I think, I think most, because obviously if you thought that it had to be something made with means of production and one's kind of labor mixed in with that, that would exclude people who work in the service industry. And to say that they are not proletariat. I think for some, a socialist would be counterintuitive. 2 reasons. 1, it would introduce a new type of class. And 2, it would mean that we could exploit the hell out of the service industry, and we've done nothing wrong. Even according to a Marxist conception of exploitation, that seems strange. Presumably, the socialist wants to say that's still a type of exploitation. So if someone does something and it generates some sort of profit, right, then that person, because they have also mixed in their labor into the product that's being consumed, in this case, the podcast, is now owed something, right? They now own a part of that. So let's say that you can't, but you shouldn't pay guests because it's weird. That's effectively a form of exploitation, because they have done labor for you, and you decided. The other kind of interesting point is that he says it's a third. You might say, "Wow, that's really cool," but what would be important here is if these people had voted on how the distribution is. What's important here is not the distribution itself. According to him, I don't think it's how the distribution comes about. So a third might be really good, right? But if people didn't vote for it, if it was kind of decided on by him and the other people who have joined up in this podcast venture, then they didn't kind of vote for it, or they didn't vote to give the other people a third, then arguably that wouldn't be socialist. It'd still be like some sort of private firm setting up what they believe to be a justified distribution of what people should be paid. So surely like a guest, like it just seems really dodgy, right? To say if someone volunteers to do work for me, I can keep all of the profits and distribute it to only the people who I desire to, not this other person, right? Because that's the same sort of thing capitalists do, except that they enter us in some sort of voluntary contract, but they do choose to, like, part of that is giving a person a certain amount of money or wage in order to encourage them to keep part of this, to volunteer their labor. So yeah, it would seem weird that someone who's volunteering to be on a podcast isn't, in some sense, not given their due in terms of what their labor was worth, in terms of like use value. It also seems kind of odd. It also seems, in some sense, a bit weird to say that if someone is doing something for you, that they should be rewarded in some respect. Otherwise, you are exploiting kind of like their voluntary actions. That's not cool.
Yeah, but yeah, March gets 1/3 of the entire revenue generated at the moment from the Fear End podcast operation, which you can go and subscribe to at patreon.com/fearend.
Listen, every system that you mentioned in which you apply your socialist values to, you are making money from these systems, and that's fine. That's okay. But the areas that I think should be more consistent in are the ones where you take a percentage of your wealth. Now, listen, this argument that your chat gives, or you give, or your loyalists give, of, oh, so if you're a socialist, you have to be broke on the streets, that example in itself has to be the most delusional, extreme example. Why combat?
Wait, I don't know what you're talking about. Explain what you mean.
I'm trying to.
I'm a little slow. I'm a dumb guy. I need you to break it down for me a little bit. I'm serious.
Okay.
What do you mean? I just gave you an example of where I do this, and I want you to explain what you mean.
What I mean is, do you not preach a society where healthcare is free?
Having the chat, you can't see me pointing out, having the chat here too of his really helps with regards to optics, because it ends up creating a kind of social proof of him being correct. So an interesting kind of feature of human psychology is, or epistemology, how we come to know things, is that we tend to look out at the world and what people believe, and we use that just as much as our senses to figure out what's true or what to believe. And that sometimes we trust that more than we trust our own senses. So when you see this kind of thing happening, you might think, I think he's kind of wrong, but all these people say he's kind of right, so maybe I'm missing something. and that kind of, we think that's a justifiable reason. It's a kind of testimony of other people to believe something. So that's very cute that he puts that there. Yeah.
A society where education is not as backwards as it is in America today, right? These systems, in my opinion, you are in a position where if you truly believe that implementing these systems are a real thing, you are in a position to do something that matches what you say. Otherwise, you're just selling false hope in a business model fashion, which is capitalism, right? In a nutshell, to make the money. That's easy to do, but you are in a position to do more. Do you understand?
Do you want me to open up a hospital? Because I think you're.
It's not about opening up a hospital. It's not.
What is it about? Give me specific examples of what I can do, so I can tell you if it's like feasible or not.
Okay, so for example, I know a lot of your vocal minority community argue that the mental health care program is a charity, right? But that program, the part of the charity that it is just the part in America. If we were to implement that program, right? Taxes would pay for the program. In this situation,
absolutely.
Real quick. In this situation, we don't have that luxury, right, of having a tax system to draw a lot of money from the people. So what's replacing it is the charity aspect. To confuse that the system itself is a charity it's not comparable to the excuse of not doing it.
Are you asking me to provide everyone in my community health care?
I'm asking you to follow through with what you say. So to create, the system, create education as well, right? You could create a system in which you put a percentage aside that you believe the rich should put aside in America, and you implement that on a small scale to show that, listen, guys, this works. If we can do it, so can America. If you can't even do it yourself and you give these excuses.
So you want me to set up like a 501c3 specifically to like pay the hospital bills of every single member in the community that pays?
No. It's about creating a system. You understand? Ignore the actual payment of. It's a system that reflects what you preach and delivers it to people who do not have the financial means to get what you believe they have a right to get. Do you understand? That's what it's about. That's what implementing, that's what the actions over the words means when you sit there and you preach what you preach on a daily basis and make millions from it, right? And that's okay to make millions from it. It's okay.
But Train.
But there needs to be an implementation of it.
You understand I'm not the government, right? Like
I just explained the proportional or the comparison between what would be right in this situation. You create a system, and through your own donation, you would be virtually the tax system that would pay for it in a governmental form, right?
Okay, like that's what you're describing. What you're taking the long way to describe is literally, first of all, charity. For the record, insurance on the other hand,
the difference.
Or taxes on the other hand. Insurance or taxes, which are two different ways of funding. Some form of healthcare or a payment mechanism for healthcare. Revolves around people paying into a system and then getting it back in the form of, adequate healthcare, right? This is how it works. You and I are...
Okay, we'll pause there for a minute. You need to create a system. Presumably he means some sort of way of... Presumably by system, what he means is ways in which end states are realized. What do I mean by that? So by end state, what I mean is there is some sort of goal, some sort of state of affairs that should be the final product that we are aiming at when we're doing something. So for example, winning is in a game of football is an end state that you and your actions while playing the game of football is to get to that end state. So when he's saying, this makes the most sense, I think, is that when he says you don't have you need socialist systems, what he's describing, I think, is you need something that accords to your values, right, in the way you think the world should be run, that realizes the type of end states that you say you care about. So what does that look like? You say that you like equality, right? Or that people have positive rights to healthcare and housing. Then so these are the end states that you want to bring about, right? And that the more of these end states you bring about, the more successful you're being, right? You need some sort of system, some sort of way of realizing that end state that you don't have. Now, it is true that charity is not socialism. Indeed, depending on the conception of socialism, charity wouldn't even need to exist because the state would handle all business of charities, because you wouldn't be able to donate. You wouldn't have that kind of market freedom to redistribute your wealth according to your values. The state would take your money and then redistribute it in accordance to their values. But it is the next best thing. It's the next best thing in terms of how to redistribute wealth in accordance to your values. So Hasan or Piker claims that there are these end states these values he cares about, these type of end states that he thinks we should be all pursuing, and he thinks that the government is the only thing that can do it, or the only thing that should do it. There's no reason to think that, government should do it, or must do it, or is the only thing that can do it. Which kind of says, again, since the government is the monopoly of violence, and that laws are coercion, that the only way of bringing out the end states is through coercion. I think what Trainwrecks is trying to say is that there are these end states you are proclaiming, and you need to show how you can begin to realize these, and the best kind of way at the moment to do them is technically through charity. But you could kind of set up your kind of world in such a way in which the people in charge of the business, which would be the workers, would decide how that is redistributed, such that it realizes these values that you proclaim to have. And since he doesn't attempt to bring about these end states, even through, I think the idea is like, look, if you just to rub it in, yeah. So I think the idea is if you say you value some end state, right? You value equality or justice or positive rights. Perhaps the best way of realizing that to the best degree is through coercion, through the apparatus of the state. But there is the next best thing, and it might not be the best, but it's at least in terms of these values, there's a gradient, right? There's the maximum amount of success, and then a threshold of barely successful. If you just started redistributing the wealth in accordance to bring about at least some of these end states that you desire, that is better than not doing fucking anything at all. Presumably that's what he means. And I think there's something to this sort of argument. Piker attempts to weasel out of it by saying, yeah, that only the government can take care of it, or at least it's the best way of doing it. And not only does that not seem true, but even if it was, it doesn't follow that you shouldn't be giving up the wealth that you're given and redistributing it to other people. Right? It doesn't follow from that. What we have here is the question kind of is, some people positive rights that aren't being satisfied, some sort of end states like healthcare and education and housing, and that the way our market system distributes wealth is not correct because it fails to meet these end states, right? Piker is in a unique position in which he can alleviate some of the suffering of these particular people by satisfying at least some of these end states. So he should effectively just give up a large bulk, or set up a system in which large swaths of his income that are freely given to him by his viewers, he should be giving all that up to, which would be charities in this case, that would move or work towards satisfying these end states. Because if he doesn't, he's just hoarding this wealth, or he's investing it into private capital that is according to his value scheme, according to the socialist kind of values that he's, whatever they are. He's not redistributing the wealth. He's not distributing wealth in accordance to these values. Right? His ways of behaving aren't fitting the pattern.
In agreement, I think, as far as how the government should operate this, right? I think you believe in free healthcare, right? I think
I do. Yes.
Okay.
Healthcare is.
So,
I believe healthcare is a right. Right.
So
I
yeah,
believe
absolutely.
our education system is completely backwards. I believe we should be encouraging students to go to school. We should be encouraging students. I believe the new baseline should be college. This idea where we're pushing that college is unnecessary, you can't apply this or that, I think is ridiculous. But I do think it stems from our backwards financial education.
So how can I do what you're describing without building a hospital or building a 501c3?
I just explained it.
Yeah, it would be charity, and you might not like that, but that would be arguably the best way of doing it. Or you approach people, you find people who would be interested in starting something to help facilitate this, and then you would enter some sort of joint venture with them, in which they also own the means of production, not just you, which would try and move towards the sort of goal. That's what the idea would be. Since you don't do that, then... Yeah, I mean, I guess the idea is something like Piker is setting up this all or nothing thing, which is either you can have all of the redistribution, but if you can't have all of it, you can't have any of it, and therefore you just don't bother about it, right? I think what Trainwrecks is trying to say is that, well, maybe he's not saying this, but I think it's a charitable way of looking at it, is like, sure, you might not be able to get all of it, but some is better than nothing. And if you really cared about this, you would try and just aim for some of it, even if it wasn't the best way of doing it, even if it didn't lead to the sorts of ends that you wanted it to. This is just your best shot at moving your kind of political project forward, is by showing to people that this is a way of living, that it is attractive, and that it is in your best interest as well to live in this kind of way.
I just explained, right? For example, the program I have, right? It's easy to compare the two and say, oh, it's a charity. No. The charity part of it is replacing the tax system in which the government would pay for that system. Since we don't have that tax system, taking a percentage of what you make, like you preach should happen for the rich, right? And putting it into that system, right? So what you make, a percentage of what you make going into that system would be replicating what the government has for taxes, right? We'd be taking it out of our pockets monthly, right, for each respective community across Twitch, across YouTube, across Kick, across wherever.
Yeah, you're saying you want to start. If I'm not misunderstanding, you want to start like a healthcare structure for Twitch watchers that us Twitch streamers put together.
Yes.
Yes, us Twitch streamers, we put together a healthcare structure. Okay.
Is that socialism though? Is that?
That's not. No, it's not. It's just.
Okay.
But
So
it
you're
is.
saying that-
But
you're
it
saying
is
you're
nice.
bullshitting.
It's not socialism.
It's a welfare program, and it's socialist in the sense that it is socialized. But yeah, it's not socialism in kind of the strict sense that Pike is talking about. But it is, again, the next best thing if you really cared about these sorts of values. That's the kind of idea. Is that you need to voluntarily choose to live a kind of way. You need to convince other people to voluntarily live this kind of way. And the idea is you can bring to people into this way of life through their own voluntary decision to do so, instead of using government monopoly on violence to coerce them into living the way that you think is the right way to live.
That's not socialism.
The wealth,
but it is nice. It is nice. It's a good idea. It's a charity.
Distributing the wealth of the rich into systems that give healthcare to the poor is exactly the values of socialism, is it not?
Yes, you're right. But by your logic, then, charities would be considered socialism, but it's not.
No.
And also, if charities eradicated the existence of these problems, if charities eradicated the existence of these problems, then in the United States of America, it's one of the most charitable countries on the planet. We would literally not have a single person die because they can't get their diabetes medication, which is why you have to advocate for the government, as I do all the time, not only put pressure on congresspersons, but like literally directly talk to them from time to time as well. And utilize my community to go vote a certain way.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, why are you a socialist, Piker? Well, presumably it's because he thinks it's morally justified, and that the type of end states, the type of values he cares about, are best realized or only realized through it, right? Right. Trainwrecks takes these values to be socialist in nature. Again, there is no reason to think, like, independent of Trainwreck's thought, there's no reason to think that these socialist values are socialist, right? These sorts of values about caring about people's health, caring about their education, caring about their character, these are values that have existed long before socialism, can be taken back to ancient Greeks to some extent. So socialism does not have a monopoly on these sorts of values that he's describing, right? So I think, yeah, Trainwrecks understands that there's a difference between socialism in terms of market systems, or right, market arrangements, or political arrangements, and the values of those systems, or why we would prefer those systems, right? So we can kind of split it between socialism as a type of market system, as a type of political system, and that there are socialist values, right? And that the reason why you would adopt these socialist systems is because they are the best way of realizing socialist values. Since you can't yet have these systems, because that would require a significant amount of coercion, you can only do the next best thing, which is find ways of realizing as best you can the socialist values. And that might end up being at base charity, which is absolutely the case. But the idea is that that is the next best thing, and that if you can arrange your life and find other people who will voluntarily arrange their life the same way, such as a microcosm of the market political system that you adopt, right? Then this can show how the system is possible and how it does produce the values that you care about. It might not be the perfect way, right, that you want to do it, but it is the next best thing. I think the idea is, since you do not do the next best thing, right, to realize these socialist values, then you don't actually care about these socialist values, right? Because if you did, you'd be willing to sacrifice these other things you care about, such as luxury, but you don't, right? Hasan Piker makes the claim that some people in this sort of next best thing project would not get, there'd still be homeless people, there'd still be dying people, people who still wouldn't get food or medicine, etc., etc. But to be clear, even if the government did it, that's still the case, right? There's no reason to think that every single person who needs any of these kinds of basic necessities, there's no reason to think they're going to get them. Why? Because things don't just pop into existence out of nothing. They're made by people. There is a limited amount of stuff. There is a limited amount of effort. There is a limited amount of reasoning power, and someone's got to pay. When you're kind of figuring out where to distribute things, you need to make sacrifices, and sometimes you're not going to be able to give all the things that you want to. You might be able to kind of distribute the perfect way that you want to get all the things that you desire. So you're going to have to make trade-offs, and governments already make trade-offs with regards to even their kind of welfare systems, right? Some things don't get covered by things like dental, for example. I think in Australia don't get covered by our socialized medical system, right? That is one thing that is sacrificed because there are other things that the government attempts to realize, and it chooses to sacrifice healthcare, right? So some people's health in some ways don't get what they arguably need. In other words, someone's paying for something, and you can't expect, just because the government can now handle it, that's going to solve all of the problems for all of the people with regards to even these kinds of basic values. So that's just wrong. There's no reason to think that. That's never happened, and I doubt it ever will. Someone always misses out. And it's just a decision about who gets to make that decision about who gets to miss out. So yeah, I think Trainwrecks could better dress up his idea by saying, yeah, I understand that there is a difference between these socialist systems in terms of government coming from the government, right, or government mandated systems such as a market economy, which is socialist, or a political system which is socialist. And I get that you might think that's the best way of arriving at your socialist values or realizing them, and that might be true. But since you can't do that, does it follow then that you should just do nothing about your socialist values? And the answer, according to Trainwrecks, is, and I think we should agree with him, is that no, you should aim for the next best thing. You should at least try and save some people, help as many people as you can, rather than just not help anybody at all. Right. This discussion about it being a poverty cult, I think, completely misses the point of the criticism that is being made. Right. It isn't a matter of being a poverty cult. It's a matter of saying what someone needs. Right. What is the fucking? I think I should memorize this. To each and according to their ability, or from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. So the question is, do you need all of this stuff? Can you survive without it? Because there's other people who need things, and when you buy your kind of luxury, unneeded but desired things, you're effectively sacrificing the needs of others. So it's not that it's a poverty cult, right? The point is it's a necessity cult. I think that's maybe that's not as a fun way to put it, but it's effectively a necessity cult, which is like, do you need something? Because if you don't, you shouldn't have it, and we should take what you were going to spend on it and give it to someone who's going to get something they need. All right, that's the idea. So what does this mean? Effectively, what it means is someone should sacrifice, or what's expected is that someone should sacrifice to the point of marginal utility. Now that looks like poverty, but it just means that someone should be giving up everything that they don't need, so that other people in that society, so that whatever they were going to spend on those things that they don't need, can be redistributed to people who actually need things. Right? So I think that's a more accurate criticism of this idea as a poverty cult, a deflection about the main issue at hand here, which is about whether someone needs something or not. Right, that's the problem.
I am technically trying to do that in a grander scale. It's unfortunately very difficult to accomplish.
So let me ask you this:
there's also no reason to think you can't do both. There's no reason to think that you can't talk to local representation or federal representation to attempt to actualize your views, and there's no reason to think that you can't also do that while redistributing your wealth that has been given to you by your viewers or by whoever. You can't just redistribute that yourself. There's no reason to think it's not both.
Socialist himself cannot find a way to distribute a percentage of his wealth. Who do you expect to do it? The fucking capitalist sitting at the top? It needs to start somewhere.
No,
it needs to start somewhere, right?
No,
if we can't do it on this level, how are you expecting a country of 335 million to implement it on that scale? We need to find a way to proportionally scale it within our business models, whether it's the charity aspect, replacing or replicating the tax system. Do you understand? Like, the action needs to be.
You do realize countries have socialized healthcare, right? Like the UK has the NHS system. So like,
I've lived in the UK for a few years. NHS fucking sucks. One. Oh God. Just because something's socialized again doesn't mean that it works the way that you want it to. or the ways that it probably ought to, because there is human error and etc. 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 But yeah, Trainwrecks points out, I think he's getting closer to it now, is that the charity thing replicates the tax thing. So first, it's voluntary, so there's no use of threat of violence to get to do it. And second, it might not be perfect, but it's the next best thing. And so why don't you just do the next best thing, right? Yeah, it would. Yeah, why don't you just do that? Because some good is better than no good. Blah 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 blah. Yeah.
Literally, just pointing to that should be able to have a wake.
Oh, yeah, right. And Hasan points out that of course no capitalist is going to give up their wealth that they're entitled to or otherwise. Even if they're not entitled to it, they're not going to do that. And presumably, then, I mean, what does that mean? Well, it means that you need to use the state or government to coerce them into doing it. What does this mean? It means violence, or it means threat of violence to do these sorts of things. So, I mean, what Hasan, and then, this is just a general kind of criticism against socialism in terms of government, is that there is a base need for political threat of violence in order to bring it about. And you might have an issue with the idea that, first, that anyone could ever kind of threaten you to take your stuff and to give it to someone else that you have not consented to. And the second thing is you might think that, you own your labor, it's yours, and you voluntarily choose to sell it. And whatever someone gives you for that labor, if they give you anything, is yours, not somebody else's. And therefore, someone threatening you to take away the fruits of your labor, whatever they might be, is immoral. So it seems, when Piker's saying, of course, these people won't give it up. Of course, people don't want to do this. If people don't want to do this, you're going to have to force them to. And it's hard to think that, at least for me, I mean, maybe I'm alone here, but it's hard to think that a more just society is one that is forced to produce a kinds of end states that one particular thing, one particular person, or even a group of persons find to be the best. They are now justified in using violence to make everyone obey them, or fit to the pattern.
Up moment for the minds of millions of Americans, but it still hasn't worked. So technically what you're saying is well-intentioned, and I love that you're saying this, but it demonstrably doesn't work. I point to actively working socialized healthcare structures on a daily basis, and yet I have not been able to, individually at least, move the needle on getting Americans to get on board with Medicare.
So again, we've got Medicare in Australia. It's pretty great. There's obviously better systems, but the idea is, even if you have a federal system of, say, healthcare in this case, so it's if you have some sort of socialized medical program, that doesn't mean it's going to help everybody, right? So, and it doesn't mean it's going to be the most effective way of doing it, helping people. So there's two problems there, which is that it's not fulfilling what he wants it to, which is presumably realizing these values. And the second thing is presumably he still thinks that's okay, precisely because it's better than something is better than nothing, which obviously is a problem for the idea of the charity thing, because he doesn't want to do the charity thing because he doesn't think it's going to produce as much good as, say, a government thing. So it's like there's almost like this threshold of the amount of good one should do, and if one can't get it, then one should just not try at all. And that seems a little weird to think that. I don't think many people act that way in their lives. I don't think there's any rational reason for doing that, except if there are other values that we think we can kind of maximize, and then we choose to sacrifice that one for the other one. So, for example, I suppose you really enjoy luxury goods, and that's a value of yours to own luxury goods, and to eat takeaway a lot, and to have famous friends, right? And then there's the value of helping other people secure like housing and safety and blah blah blah. You might think that there's some sort of threshold that you need to reach, that you could help some people, wouldn't reach that threshold, and so you just shouldn't help any of these people because it would sacrifice too much for this other value. So you should just maximize this one. That seems, I mean, in terms of like values, personal values, maybe that's the case, but in terms of like these kind of political values that he's promoting, that is, I would suggest that that's a bit counterintuitive. Yeah, oh, there's another problem here. What's the other problem? I think the other problem. No, I've lost it. No,
Careful. Neither did Bernie Sanders. Again, unfortunately.
We'll agree to disagree on that. And next topic.
Oh, right. So we can imagine. So Piker seems to think that if the government just does it, it's better than if private enterprises and private citizens do it. That seems really fucking strange. We can imagine a world in which the government does a much worse job at something than private citizens. So just imagine a world, some possible world in which whenever the government tries to do healthcare, it ends up producing less of a preferred end state. But then when it's left to individuals, it produces more, right, of our end state. So the idea for this imagined example is, suppose that we think people should have a right to healthcare, such that if you don't give someone healthcare, you're violating their rights. Suppose we attempted to realize this through the government, and it actually performed worse than private citizens attempting to realize that end state. Right. Suppose on a scale of 1 to 10, the state got a 5 and private citizens got a 7. It would seem very strange to say still, right, that we should be going with the government one, even if it's producing worse outcomes, right, for people. That just seems kind of strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Wait, I don't know what the disagreement there is, though. I gave you an example of socialized healthcare working in a larger system and pointing to that, and yet that still doesn't get Americans on board in certain instances. But the reality is, even if all Americans were on board, okay, even if every single American, like the abortion ban, for example, were on board, 75% of Americans thought abortion should be protected, and yet the Supreme Court decided against it. Why? Because that's just how it is. When the rich and powerful get together and build billions of dollars worth of dark money funded super PACs and lobbying groups, they get their way regardless of what the Americans think or feel. And the same goes for healthcare as well, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry with a lot of people making money that you and I would look at it and go, holy shit, that is a lot more money than we make. That is the unfortunate reality here. That's what we're going up against. So pointing to an example of like a charity individually working within my community or within Twitch, okay, that's a very nice thing to do.
It's a system.
And we can talk more about it.
Is disingenuously being presented.
It's not disingenuous. There's nothing wrong with charity.
What he says though is that he says that inherently that's not the socialism that he's supposed to uphold, like you think he is. When he
so what socialism is so the socialism is okay,
labor. His socialism that he pushes. So
the socialism that requires him to give no percentage of his money and only requires him to preach is the socialism he's for. You don't find that convenient?
Pay a decent amount of taxes in California.
That he's coerced to pay more taxes somehow makes him a better socialist. That seems really weird. One problem here, how to put this? Yeah, so Piker keeps making this weird claim that even if everyone wanted to do what I wanted to do, or at least a large portion of the population, like 75% wanted to do what I wanted to do, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, because you got the fat cats at the top who won't let it happen. Okay. And that this is supposed to tell us something about how he should act. This is a really weird claim to make. Just because other people fail to act morally doesn't seem to relieve us of our moral duties, right? Because sure, even if it's not the values of those people, it can be my values, and I can choose to fulfill them anyway, even if other people choose not to. You might think that's unfair. Maybe there's an element of unfairness going on there. There's some sort of violation of some sort of contract or some sort of game theory element to it. But, you know, imagine using that for something else, right? Imagine using that like, you know, I saw someone drowning yesterday when I was walking past the beach, and other people saw them and didn't help them. So since they didn't help them, I don't have to, right? I'm now relieved of the duty of helping them. That seems really fucking weird. It's just really counterintuitive. So the idea that just because a group of people choose not to do the morally right thing, if this is the morally right thing, somehow relieves you of your duty to do the morally right thing, that is a very strange thing to think. I think maybe with regards to some sort of moral kind of things, but if we're talking about like these kinds of stringent political values that Hasan like preaches on a daily basis, we would expect something a bit more robust there, right? Which is that if you see people in need, and you really believe that, you know, that these things are so important that people should be coerced into doing it by the government, then at the very least, you should expect that even without that coercion of other people, that you should still be fucking doing it. That's how important it is, right? And that he doesn't do it might strike us as saying something about these values. I think there's also a discussion about de facto and de jure, right? So I think what again, okay, how do I put this? The next best thing argument. If everyone agreed with Hasan, 75%, but the last 25 are at the top, and they were the ones with the levers of power, and they chose not to do it. They chose not to coerce it. Well, you wouldn't need the coercion, right? You wouldn't need the government to redistribute wealth, because if 75 people agreed with these socialist values, they would be doing it anyway, right? So although you wouldn't have a socialist state by de jure, you would have it at least as de facto, right? It would be a de facto socialist state. It would be socialist in all of its features, except in name only, right? Because if people really did agree that the owners should work, that the workers should own the means of production, and that these sorts of socialist values, these end states, should be realized, and if 75% of the population voluntarily behaved in these ways, then that would be enough for the society to effectively become socialist, at least in terms of like a de facto socialist world country, as opposed to officially like a de jure. And again, that might not be like quote unquote socialism in the way that Hasan understands it, which is a governmental, authoritarian kind of controlling of how people should arrange their lives. But it's, again, the next best thing. And if this next best thing realizes the values that you claim to care about, why would you not choose the next best thing, right? Why would you not do that?
But that's not but I don't consider that to be social.
We legally
it's like
have
Keynesian
to.
economics. That's wealth distribution, and I think that's adequate. And I think that
To be clear, it's not wealth distribution; it's wealth redistribution. So, what do I mean by that? Wealth is already distributed, right? I don't know how to give an example of that. It already is. You have some wealth. Other people have more wealth than you. Other people have less. Wealth is already distributed. The question is the distribution of this wealth justified? Is it morally justified? For the socialists, the answer is no. Because of, well, it could be for two reasons. It could be the history of how the distribution occurred, or it could be that the distribution doesn't fit an end state or some sort of pattern that they think is justified. So what you need to do is redistribute the wealth, right? You need to take the wealth away and then redistribute it according to the desired rules or pattern or realizing the type of end states that you think are just. Right? So it's not a matter of distribution; it's a matter of redistribution.
It's apt. I wish that, you know, billions of it wasn't used on fucking finding new and creative ways to like blow brown children in fucking school buses in Yemen, but unfortunately, that is what our American government has decided to spend.
That has nothing to do with the conversation.
That is an unfortunate byproduct of living here. But even the meager amount of that goes back into funding the roads, funding the school system, I'm happy with and I'm comfortable with, and I talk about it during tax season all the fucking time. But if you think that like charity is socialism, then you know,
I didn't say charity is socialism. I was referring to a system that we create as a streamer. And the charity aspect, right, which provides that system, would be the way we replicate the tax system, right? Within America, the government has a tax system which they would funnel their money into programs for the people who can't afford it. It would give people access to healthcare. It would cover certain educational costs to push education through. What I'm saying is we create a system, and since we do not have a tax system,
you just
we can
swapping
use
the word charity for system, by the way. Like that's what you're doing, which is fine. Again, I have no issues with charity. I'm showing you the
difference, right? It's about creating the system, right? And the charity would be the pool of money used to fund the system that gives healthcare to your community to show that it works. What you preach works. You can take from the rich and provide for the poor, provide for the people who don't have the
real charities at the top of the hour.
Security or the
Presumably by system, he means the arrangement of how the charity distributes or redistributes the wealth. I think that's the idea. I think. Again, it's not entirely clear what he means by it, because charities do have systems about how they choose to distribute the donations. So it's not entirely clear to me what he means precisely by that. But yeah, I think, you know, listening to it more, yeah, he is attempting to articulate that you can have a de facto socialist microcosm of socialism through charity. And look, that's not a de jure socialism, but it can be enough if it replicates the outcomes that you want, which are realizing your socialist values. And since you don't even do the next best thing, then arguably you don't even give a shit really about the actual values that you care about.
The luxury
where there's a 3-minute ad
in
break.
America, which is so,
and if you no longer want to see those ads, you can get gifted a sub.
Healthcare, right? To have basic educational costs covered, to push that, we need that kind of stuff, right? So I believe we need to act instead of just preach. Otherwise, where does it start? Where does the chain reaction start?
Yeah.
This is a misunderstanding. I think he kind of agrees with you, right? But at the same time, when you say to uphold socialism, in his view, he does, because socialism is the means of production, and the workers and the labor, right? That is his socialism. So even though he agrees with you, he still doesn't agree with the fact that you think that this is socialism when he said what his socialism is, right? So that's what this disconnect is. So I do agree that there's a domino effect. Because
what he's talking about is just charity, which is great. I love that as a concept, and I'm on board with it. It's just not, it's demonstrably failed to improve. That doesn't stop me from giving money to charities, all right? Obviously. That doesn't stop me from funding money or doing fundraising for charities and also directly donating. But
really clever.
What he's talking about as far as charities actually solve the issues,
listen,
the United States of America would have no healthcare issues.
To help you understand this, okay?
That's kind of false. We have healthcare issues in countries that have socialized medical care like Australia still have health issues. It's simply not true that just because it becomes federalized that you immediately solve this sort of problem. And not only that, like, arguably new problems arise, right? Because then people argue about, because you only have a limited amount of money, right, to fund these programs. People argue vehemently about, you know, what's more important, like the order of values or the order of the importance of the different types of medical problems that exist, right? So that's simply false. And again, he's ignoring the point or refuses to kind of engage with it, which is there is the next best thing. And we can set up the next best thing through our voluntary choices. And sure, it might not be, you know, your golden utopia, but it is the next best thing. So why don't you do the next best thing? And the idea that charity's failed, like, charity doesn't solve these sorts of problems in the sense that like they no longer exist, right? These problems are byproducts of our freedoms, right? Our freedoms to make choices about how to live our lives and who to associate with and what to spend our earnings on, if we earn anything at all, or how much we choose to earn, right? These kind of problems are arguably some of them, obviously not all of them, are a byproduct of these sorts of things, right? And charity is a way in which you get people to voluntarily do the right thing without coercing them to do it. And effectively, Hasan is saying that, well, since it can't solve the problem completely, therefore shouldn't be done. And for some reason, without any sort of like empirical evidence to show it, he states that if you just let the government do it, it will solve the problem. And medical problems and homelessness still exist in places that have these socialist. So it's just fucking wrong.
Healthcare program, okay? Because you keep saying charity, okay?
And to be clear, like realizing those things, you don't need the workers to own the means of production, right? You just increase taxes and then redistribute taxes in accordance to these values. So you don't even need, like, it doesn't follow from the proletariat owning the means of production. It doesn't follow from that there will be a correct distribution of wealth to realize these sorts of values. These are two separate things, right? If you really cared about these values, you would attempt to realize them as best you can, even within an imperfect world. Which is presumably what we already try and do with any of our values, right? Yeah, but he's really good. Hasan is really good at picking up an objection. He's really good at picking up an objection, making it a strong point of his own personal character, and then flipping it and kind of deflecting away from the real problem at stake here. And Train doesn't know how to handle that. It's hard to call someone out on using rhetorical devices because it makes you look petty and it makes it look like you're trying to change the topic. So these cute little rhetorical devices of how he disrespects Train or fakes kind of caring about what he has to say and then making out that he's just clearly wrong, or attempting to own it as some sort of act of humility, it's quite clever.
So yes, the money goes into the charity to hold, right? What I'm referring to is the system that's created, right? The viewer can now, that does not have access to healthcare, can now have a way through me taking a percentage of my wealth and putting it as a funding source to free healthcare. Ignore the charity part of it. It's the system. This is what I mean by actions over.
It's charity in the sense that it's a voluntary giving up of your money to something. It's charity in that sense, but presumably, yes, system he means is how once the money is given up, how it's used. That's what he means by system. Yeah.
Over words. Yes, you're right. If everyone was paying into, but in the form of taxes, if everyone was
paying into in the form of taxes, taxes are coercive, right? You don't get to choose whether you get. For whatever reason, Hasan seems to think that it's okay, it's better for us to coerce people out of their money rather than them choosing to give it up freely of their own volition. Right? And that strikes me as fucking weird, right? Why would I think, if it was possible to bring about these socialist values, these end states, by either of these means, and they were both equally successful, why would we just not choose? It wouldn't matter which one we chose, right? I don't know why he thinks that giving up money is somehow like not as morally good as coercing people out of it.
Paying into the government, and the government's like, we're going to take some of this money and we're going to build hospitals. We're going to build rural hospitals, which is a major problem as well in America. And we're going to make sure that everyone can get health care.
So charities, some charities also build hospitals, so
for free when they go into a hospital. that would be socialized medicine. It would not be socialism. It would be a form of socialization.
So couldn't you implement what you preach into a system like that for your community to have access to things that they don't have access to because of their financial means, right? Because of their financial situations. That's what I'm asking.
Would that not be better?
Preach,
I think that is doable, certainly. And that is, it's not impossible. The problem in that situation would be that it would require me dropping everything I normally do and basically learn an entirely new set of skills. It would not be a system. It would, again, just be a charity, that a 501c3 that I would have to set up. And I, unfortunately, am a dumbass who doesn't know anything about setting up a 501c3, which is why I usually, just like you did, work with other 501c3s that are pre-existing in this regard. But again, I have raised and also funded more than $500,000 last year, which is a marginal amount in comparison to how charitable you are. You're a very charitable person. And this year so far, almost like 2 million, if I'm not mistaken, to various different causes. I don't think that that is socialism. I just want to make that clear. I don't think that that's socialism. I do it because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm a very fortunate person, and I think the capacity to be able to give back is a good thing. That's why I do it. But even by that metric of like, if you think that building...
See how he just quickly points out that, yes, giving voluntarily is a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And I do that because I recognize that, which makes me a good person. And then he keeps moving on, right? Why would you not just want to do more of that? Why would you not want to set up a world, even if it's a microcosm, in which people do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, as opposed to coercing them out of their money through taxation, which is, you don't recognize what the right thing to do is, or you do and you don't have the strength of will to do it. I'm going to have to basically force you to do it against your own will. And then he just moves on, doesn't even pause to take a breath there. It's a really cute rhetorical device used there. Again, we can say, sure, it's not socialism if people donate, and that you know, that's fine. But there's these values. He also seems to, at least here, recognize that these values aren't socialist, that they're just good, right? Helping people is good. It's the right thing to do. Right? He doesn't say that they're socialist, though. He seems to recognize that socialism is a separate kind of entity. If that's the case, then, like, is socialism only valuable because it gets us these goods? Can we get these goods another way? And if we can get these goods another way, to varying degrees, why would we not just do that? Why do we need to care about this fucking socialism thing anymore? Trainwrecks just seems completely incapable of articulating these sorts of points.
Sorts of systems is socialism, then I guess I'm a relatively socialist person.
I think it's a, right, for each individual, right, it's a value within themselves, right? So if you're making X and X amount of dollars, I believe because of the fortunate situation both you and I are in, I do believe in higher taxes for us. I do believe in both of us taking a percentage of our wealth and putting it into systems, right?
I don't think that they should be, I don't think they should be taxed more. I don't know if that's come through on my describing taxation as coercion. But yeah, I don't know. Just give up the money, guys, if you think it's that important.
That can distribute it to people and give them the baseline, what I believe to be a right, which is healthcare, education systems that pay for their schooling based on, let's say, hardworking students or whatever the hell that is, GPA, whatever you want to measure that by, right? That's what I believe. So what I'm saying is, I do think, ignore the charity aspect. I'm referring to the systems. The charity is just a funding.
Yeah, now he's using systems. Yeah, right? Maybe I don't understand what he means by systems.
Should not just talk it. We should act on it. System. Right? So we should take a percentage of our wealth, whether it's 20%, 30%, 10%, whatever it may be, and put it towards systems that give what we believe to be a right to the people that don't have access to these things that I believe should be a right, right?
I think so the system you're describing is a 501c3 though, right? Like that's...
In this situation, the 501c3 would be provided, and all you would have to do, right? So let's hypothetically say for this mental health care program, right? Wouldn't you say if you don't want to create that, that this is it's right there, right? It's a system you believe in for your community, right? So why would
again
Hassan doesn't agree with? I'm just agree.
Okay, go ahead.
Hassan doesn't. Even though he thinks these things are good and he wants to do those things, and sometimes he hasn't, or maybe he will in the future, he still doesn't view that as a fundamental socialism.
Wait, first of all, I do those things. Let's make it clear. I think I do a decent of a job at doing those things.
Yeah, but I still think that he doesn't view that as the fundamentals of
It's not
socialism.
enough.
That's not what he preaches.
Yes.
Therefore, he's not.
The redistribution of
feel like
wealth
you've
is
gotten
nowhere
him
near as
yo, dude,
would be
even though I
required.
get this much, well, Hassan doesn't feel like you got him on not doing what he preaches when this is not what he preaches in that regard to socialism. That's what he feels like.
So you're picking and choosing what aspects of socialism apply based on what you have to act on, what you don't? I'm confused.
I mean, ask Hassan.
So we're cherry picking what parts of socialism we want to preach, and those are dependent on which ones actually require you to distribute a percentage of your wealth into systems that distribute it to the people that are less. It seems like we're cherry picking what we have to act on and what we don't. It just seems very convenient to me.
I think that the fundamental disagreement here is that charitable donations is socialism is like kind of your perspective here. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You can correct me, but that's all I've heard from you as far as like maybe you don't say charitable donations, you say systems, but that's kind of what you're talking about. And that is fundamentally not true, which is fine. It's still fine, though. You're right. I think it's a good thing to, again, uphold charity and try to do your very best to help others who are less fortunate. But if you're asking me as someone who like at least describes the concept of what socialism is, that is not true. What you're describing is just fundamentally just a 501c3.
I feel like there's a disconnect for you and probably with others as well in what I'm referring to, okay? And the only reason, okay, let's take my mental health care program as an example of this, since it's the only thing I can show you in this regard. That's on Twitch. That can help you understand this, okay? So ignore the charity aspect of what's going on there, okay? That's there. The reason I had to work with them is because obviously as a streamer, right, we don't pay some sort of streamer tax within Twitch.
Well, the reason he has to say that is because other streamers can't use coercion to take money from other streamers. That's why it's charity, because it has to be voluntarily given up.
Where we can funnel that money and put it towards systems we believe in, right? So ignore the charity aspect. Instead, compare it in this system, right? When I say system, I'm referring to the system where I take a percentage of my wealth monthly, put it into, let's say, a pot, and from there, access is given to viewers in my community that do not have access to mental health care, right? That charity is only replicating what the U.S. government, it's proportionally replicating, right?
Yes,
what the U.S. government has for a tax system.
What you're describing, yes, exactly. The main difference is voluntary donations versus taxes, right? And you're right.
That's the only way that we, right, proportionally as
yeah, and if that produces the socialist values you want in terms of the end goals of what you think the point of socialism is, such as equality, healthcare, education, then why not do that, even if that's not as good as your vision? Right? And if it's better, imagine if it was better, would you still go and do the socialist thing?
I understand you're describing a charity when you keep explaining it, though. Like that's it's the charity that you work with, RAD, right? You work with RAD.
Yes.
Is a pre-established 501c3. It's a charity. So you are giving money to RAD, which is a wonderful thing. Okay, it's great.
No, it's a separate program, right?
Okay, it's a separate program. Sure.
It's a separate program within RAD. I'm using RAD to replicate what it would be in America using their tax systems to pay for mental health care. You understand?
You're not wrong. That is actually a very decent way. That is a very decent way to describe. That is a very decent way to try to describe socialized healthcare and why it's ethical and why it's the right thing to do. I agree with you if that is what you're saying as far as like socialized healthcare. It's still not socialism. So if you're asking me what socialism is, or if it conflicts with my values that I haven't like set up a 501c3 personally,
it's not about setting up. It's about taking a percentage of your wealth, like you preach, the rich should do, and doing it yourself and implementing it, right? So if Do you understand? So do you do that? Do you take a percentage, 10, 20, 30% of your wealth and put it towards systems that give free healthcare to the people? Or are you just relying on the tax systems of America as your distributive wealth process?
I definitely do donate a lot more than just what the taxes are. Absolutely. I do. I don't know what percentage of my overall wealth that is, but yes, I absolutely do. Regardless, though, I don't think that that is socialism. I do it not because it's socialism. I don't do it because I want to make like...
I think you're misunderstanding my point, right?
Not socialism, I do it because it's right. Yeah, so... yeah, there's a fundamental disagreement about... right, so why would you adopt some sort of political system or some sort of market system? Well, one reason one would do that is because it reaches, or it hopes to achieve what you value. The reason we might hate something like capitalism is because we value health, education, housing. We might value these things, and we might look at the world under a system in which people are allowed to make free choices as generating an unacceptable amount of byproduct in which people's health, education, and housing are not being met. So you look to another system, in this case socialism, at least according to Hasan's vision of it, is that taxes are raised and then taxes are redistributed in accordance to satisfying health, education, and housing, these values, to the best of their ability. Whether there be a balance between them or attempting to maximize one and leaving the few left behind, the idea is that. Right? If you can find a way within a free market in which individuals have the freedom to do as they wish with their labor, their earnings, and their capital. If you can find a way of improving the end states you care about, right? And that socialism isn't a live option because you can't convince enough people to use coercion on others to give up the money, why would you not pick this one? It seems in some sense you're just worshipping socialism because it doesn't provide or has no chance of providing the grounds for the things that you value. And again, we can imagine a world in which even if socialism was realized, it would do a worse job of realizing these values. Trainwrecks thinks that these values are socialist. Hasan does not. Hasan seems to accept that these values are independent of socialism, that they are just right. It's got nothing to do with them being right or valuable in accordance to some sort of economic or political philosophy. Right? So why would you want socialism? Well, presumably he thinks that socialism is either more morally just or in terms of like rules, or it's right in terms of producing better outcomes for the values you have. God, oh shit, I just lost my train of thought. I'll be doing this for almost 2 hours. All right, we might stop here, might come back to this. The idea here, I think, is that Hasan in some sense doesn't actually care about these values. He seems to only care about socialism, right? And whether they realize these values or not, right, or whether one can, it's kind of not important, right? That seems wrong though, because he clearly thinks that if we had socialism, all of these values would be realized to their maximal degree, or something to that effect. But then when he's told that there's ways in which you can increase these values, why would you not choose that when you can? And he says, oh, it's not going to do it enough, right? That should strike us as a little odd. The other problem, so we're talking about redistribution, right? Redistribution of wealth. Charity is a way in which you can redistribute wealth. Right, you can redistribute through coercion and tax, or you can do it through charity. Right? Since the government won't do it the way that you want it to, all you're left with is charity. And sure, again, that might not be socialism in the sense of a political and economic system, but it's the next best thing. And if you really care about these values you claim to care about, which often involve redistribution of wealth, why would you not be doing more of this? You might say, as you mentioned, the numbers of what he's raised are significant, and this might be enough. It's not clear to me that that's true, particularly for a Marxist socialist, because when we think about redistribution as in accordance to need, we end up with a really challenging problem, which leads to the poverty cult deflection. So I want you to imagine this person who's made it to the end of this video. You are going to a job interview, or you have a date, and you're very excited about this proposition. You've put on your best pair of shoes and your best clothes. You're walking, you constantly walk past the park every day. And some days when it's rained, it gets particularly muddy and wet in some areas, so that makes these little bogs, little pockets of water in the park field. On this particular day, with your best pair of shoes on, which will say only $300, right? Which is not a non-trivial amount of money for a pair of shoes, but these are some good shoes that you really like. You're walking to this important meeting or date, and on this particular day when you walk past the park, it was raining the night before, and it's left this bog of pond. And this particular day when you're walking past this important meeting with these $300 pair of shoes, you see a small child struggling in that shallow bog that occurs after rain. Right? You see that this child is struggling. Let's say they're 2 years old. You look around. There doesn't appear to be anyone else in sight. No parent, no guardian, no caretaker. And this child is drowning. And they will die. They will drown. They will eventually burn out of energy, collapse face first, and they will drown in this pond. Now, you could easily save this child, right? But there's not much time to do so. But you could easily kind of wade into it up to your kind of, we'll say, your shins or your knees. And you could save the child by grabbing them, pick them up, bring them out. You could do that. You could save their life. If you do that, though, there's an opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost is you will ruin your $300 pair of shoes that you really like, and you will not make the meeting in time. And this could spoil your chances at that job or this particular romantic partner. Of course, if you choose to go to the meeting and preserve your $300 shoes, the opportunity cost is a life, which is the child. The child will die. What should you do? Should you save the child, the single child drowning, at the cost of your meeting and opportunities it would afford, and it would definitely cost you a $300 pair of shoes? Or should you go on and leave this child to die? What should you do? Intuitively, it seems to not be as intuitively, you should save the child. Someone might say you're obligated to save the child. Even if it would ruin your shoes, we still think that you have a moral duty to save them. If you don't save them, you've done something very wrong, morally wrong. it would be very strange to us if someone saw you save that child and run up to you and say, why did you do that? You just ruined your shoes. I know those shoes, they were $300. Why did you ruin your $300 pair of shoes for this drowning child? We wouldn't take that loss of the shoes as a good reason, or any reason, to not save the child. We just go, there's a child drowning, even if I sacrifice my shoes, that's fine. Right, you might say, okay, cool, the child in the pond scenario as presented by Peter Singer, what's that got to do with it? The idea here is, we can think of this in terms of need, right? From each according to their ability, to each according to their need, right? To each according to their need. Did you need the $300 shoes? The answer is, well, you needed them for the meeting. Do you need them more than the child needs their life? The answer seems to be no. So we look at two things and we balance them out and we say, the life of the child is worth more than the $300. Part of the reason for that is that the life of the child needs to be saved more than I need my shoes, right? Now, if you take that idea seriously, right, turns out, there's people dying in Africa from starvation and war. Do you need a $5 coffee or a $5 bag of M&Ms or a $1,000 dress shirt? Do you need these things? The answer is, you might need the coffee, you might need the sugar. Maybe, depending on how you understand need, you might need the $1,000 shirt. But do you need it more? Do you need that thing more than what could have been purchased for someone to stop them dying of starvation? And the answer is no. It seems to be no. It seems that giving $5 to a charity to save the life of someone is more important than you spending $5 on a cup of coffee. And it seems to come down to need. They need the food more than you need the coffee. To each according to their need. Now, it might not be the government coercing money and then deciding through state processes who gets what. But the next best thing is charitable donation to do that. And that's going to realize the value better than what you otherwise would have done if you just kept walking, right? So if we apply this, right, kind of utility calculation to Piker's life, right, or to the life of rich people, the reason that we look at people who are financially well off, very well off, and think bad things of the way that they spend their money is by doing this kind of utility cost. We seem to think intuitively, at least, that there is a certain upper bound to the amount that someone can have that can count as need or acceptable wants, and then anything over that threshold is unacceptable. This kind of attitude justifies a distribution of wealth that is utterly unequal still, right? Because you can still have people who are very badly off, very well off, but they are within the boundaries of the acceptable kind of limits of what is inequality. Presumably for the socialist, this type of inequality that I've just mentioned, that there's someone who's getting things and they might not need these things, but they're luxuries. These people down here not getting what they need. This inequality is still unjustified. You cannot morally justify this type of inequality because this person still doesn't need these type of things. This person does need these type of things. And if a person does think they need a yacht or a double-story house or whatever, that need, whether they need it or not, is contextually dependent on the environment, but also when weighed against the needs of the other is not as weighty. Its utility isn't as great. So what we should be doing is we should be taking money that people do not need and redistributing it to people who do have needs and have to be satisfied, right? Because it's their basic rights for them to be so. So the objection to Hasan, if he thinks this is part of socialism, which arguably it is, because this is, the reason a lot of people have adopted a socialist kind of worldview is because of these kinds of massive inequalities of wealth. Is that unless you need something, it should be taken from you and be given to someone else, either in terms of the actual thing itself or the financial monetary worth of the thing, and then invested in something else. So when people see him spending $3 million on a house, right, or when they see him buying a fancy car, how much that costs, or when they see him buying designer clothes or whatever, or spending it on nice amounts of alcohol, blah blah, or trips, blah 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 blah, there's a question of, well, socialists care about satisfying these basic human rights, if these positive rights are rights at all. When he chooses to spend these large amounts of money on these things, does he need them as much as the people who don't have these rights satisfied? The answer is no. And so anytime he spends any large sum of money on something he does not need, he's effectively sacrificing the rights of others that could have otherwise been satisfied. Now, again, these aren't socialist values. And again, donating to charity wouldn't be a socialist way of satisfying these rights, but it is the next best thing. And living a life like that would show that socializing these sorts of things through your own voluntary choices, which is charity, that is a better way to live than the current way of living now, which is just living high and letting die. So the real kind of objection is that, following Peter Unger, is that Hasan preaches that we should be forced to give up our wants for the needs of others, right? But he is perfectly fine with living high and letting others die. And he's okay with voluntarily allowing that to happen. And that it would somehow be justified if a government coerced him into not doing that. Alright, I've got actual work to do now, so we'll stop it there. We might come back to this after. Alright, if you made it this far, cool. If you made it this far, that's just hot and dandy. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you.